Mike Sanella here again with the Catherine Phoenix channel, back from what I admit was a very long hiatus, but I promise I'll be getting these videos out on a more regular basis moving forward. Okay, so today we're going to be reviewing John Oliver's Medicare for All video, and unlike Crowder, we're going to try to do the whole thing. We're not going to do the whole thing, but we should be able to get through most of it to provide some context and to address some points that Crowder didn't go over. And towards the end, it gets a little bit redundant, and the points I'll be making, again, towards the end will get a little bit redundant. And since this video is probably going to be pretty long, that's probably going to be a good place to call it quits. Now, I realize I'm like 3 weeks late in this video, and it's mostly because of the technical difficulties that I've run into and that I've hopefully resolved for this video, but I think the topic is still 100% relevant today, and that's why I decided to do this video. Now, I have to give a few caveats before we start this video, and the first is that with all the technical difficulties, this is like my 20th attempt at this video, so no, you're not going to get the raw, very hot take that was my initial response to this video. Now, the other caveat I have to make is that although I completely disagree with John Oliver's politics, I actually find the guy kind of funny. So I'm perfectly willing to admit that although we disagree completely on politics, this is a guy on the left who actually does know comedy. So that's the lens that we'll be viewing this through. So without further ado, let's dive right on into the video.
We thought we'd talk about an issue that has dominated the Democratic primary. And I'm not talking about why Tom Steyer doesn't look richer, but why doesn't he though? His skin's sallow, his clothes don't fit right, and he seems to only have one tie. What is this man doing with all his fucking money? No, we're not talking about that. Instead, we're going to talk about this.
It's the hot buzz phrase for Democrats running for president, Medicare for all.
We will have Medicare for all.
We have a chance for Medicare for all.
Medicare for all?
Medicare for all.
Now there's a lot of talk about Medicare for all. What does that mean?
Great question from a great judge and an even greater human being. And to answer the question from Ruth Bader Ginsburg's inevitable successor, what is Medicare for all? Well, right now, we have what's called a multi-payer system. What that means is maybe your healthcare is covered by private insurance purchased by you or your employer, or maybe it's covered by a government program like Medicare or Medicaid, or maybe you're one of the 27 million Americans with no insurance, in which case you're fucked.
Okay, so I realize it's a joke, but that statement right there kind of misses an awful lot of nuance in this matter that we're going to get into throughout the course of this video. But up until this point, John is, for the most part, spot on in his description of what Medicare actually is. So far, so good, John.
The basic idea behind Medicare for all is that all of this will be replaced by a government-funded single-payer program. And the goal of universal healthcare coverage is...
Okay, so just a brief aside, notice how he goes from healthcare to coverage. So in what he just said is universal healthcare coverage. Medicare for all is, yes, a coverage plan, not the care itself. And there's a very, very important distinction that needs to be made between care and coverage that the left loves to blur. And I think, as you're going to see throughout the course of this video, even John makes the mistake of blurring the distinction between throughout the course of this video.
Extremely appealing. Both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have put out versions of Medicare for all, but other Democrats have been much warier of it, and conservatives absolutely hate the idea.
We cannot afford Medicare for all. This is the end of America as we know it economically.
I think literally 90% of hospitals would go under tomorrow.
Right.
So
Medicare for all. I lived in England, Sean. Nationalized healthcare is a disaster. Yeah. When rich, famous people get sick, they don't fly to Canada, they don't fly to Cuba, they come here because we have the best medicine in the world.
Okay, so before he interjects, I just want to make the caveat here too. I don't think John's cherry picking. I think he's making this video in good faith. I think the whole of the video is in good faith. And that actually is the opinion of the right. That is like the median opinion of the right on this matter. And I kind of share their sympathies.
Look, I will give that man this. America does have one of the best healthcare systems in the world for rich, famous people. Unfortunately, too many people are born in this country with a terrible pre-existing condition called not being Beyonce.
Yep, and I'm one of them. And I've already done a video on this matter, so I'll post a link in this video's description to that video. But yeah, I went to the ER and I had a giant bill dumped on my lap. And the short version is I couldn't afford the bill, but I still got the care regardless of the fact that I didn't have the money for the bill. And then because I didn't have insurance, I was able to negotiate with the hospital to get a payment plan structured that I could actually afford, and in the end cost me a whole lot less than if I had actually had insurance at the time. And we're going to get into that in further detail as we go along with this video. And again, I'll post a link to that video in this video's response. Or sorry, I'll post a link to the previous video I went into much greater depth on this matter with in this video's description, so check out that.
Some of us, many of us in fact, are Solange.
Whoever the fuck that is.
And for so many Americans, our system is badly broken. And I'm not just talking about the 27 million without health insurance, but the nearly 44 million more who are underinsured, people with high deductibles and co-pays that can end up bleeding them dry. The majority of people who file for bankruptcy cite medical expenses as a factor.
Okay, to what extent and of what kind? Those are the obvious follow-up questions you should be asking when you hear a statement like that and you see a data point like that. Because when it comes to these 58.5% of debtors, so not of people, but of debtors, if the medical expenses contribute to their debt at a rate of only like 0.1%, so if you've got $10,000 in debt and like $1 of it is some sort of medical debt, yeah, it's contributing to your bankruptcy, but to what extent? So we need to answer that question, because this point becomes completely moot if the conditions for it being a contributor are that low. But let's just assume, for argument's sake, that the entirety of everyone's debt who's in debt is nothing but medical bills and nothing else is contributing to it. Then we still want to know what type of medical care they're receiving, what type of incidents are causing these actual debts. And the reason is because are these type of medical expenses related to a gunshot wound where you need emergency care right now in order to save your life, because if you don't get it in 5 minutes, your life is an imminent and perilous risk? Are we talking about the unbelievably rare case of the childhood leukemia case where you're going to have to incur about $2.5 million worth of procedures over the course of months, if not years? Or are we talking about a broken bone? Are we talking about like an incredibly common expense of like $10,000 where your life is not an imminent and perilous risk, as the left wants you to think is the case, and where, you know, if you wait 18 months, yeah, there's going to be serious problems, but if you don't get the care right this minute, you're probably okay, and it's only going to be like $10,000.
And you probably already knew that deep down from just how often you see GoFundMe campaigns online, from worried parents of sick children or your friend who got a pineapple stuck up his arse and needs help paying the doctors to stop laughing and get it out.
So this isn't actually helping your case, John. This is actually a private sector solution to the problem of people not being individually able to afford a certain bill, in this case, a medical debt. So yeah, this isn't actually helping your case. This is a free market solution that you're not going to even consider.
And incidentally, for all the heartwarming success stories that you see, a study found 90% of crowdfunding campaigns for medical expenses fail to meet their goal.
By what level? So if 90% of these GoFundMe campaigns don't meet their goal to the tune of 95%, well, then we've got a moot point. So if you've got $10,000, and there's a reason I'm using $10,000, and we'll get into that in a bit, and in medical expenses, and you've got a GoFundMe that raised $9,500, can you go to the hospital and like say, hey man, I'm only $500 short. Can we work out a deal here? Do you think they would be totally unresponsive to that? And again, we're going to get into that in just a minute here, right? Do you think you can't just come up with another $500? If you get $9,500 from your GoFundMe, though you fail to meet your goal, are you going to be able to afford the expense? And you know what the response is going to be? No, Mike, it's more like $5,000. All right, at $5,000, can you take that $5,000, put it towards that debt, and negotiate a payment plan or negotiate the remaining $5,000? And again, all of this is moot. Every last bit of this is moot if you still get the care regardless of whether or not you can actually afford the bill, which is kind of what the definition of regardless is.
And when they fall short, it can be crushing. Watch as one family struggles to raise $10,000 for expenses arising from their 2-year-old daughter's eye disorder.
So $10,000 for a non-life-threatening condition, which isn't childhood leukemia, and like $2.5 million. So this is a wonderful anecdote, John, but it's really not going to be helping your case. And, you know, you generally tend to do things in good faith. So I'm going to extend the olive branch and assume that you're going to be doing this in good faith. And you're going to be giving the example you're giving, the wonderful anecdote you're giving is of an average couple incurring an average medical expense that puts them into an average amount of debt in relation to this 58.5% that we talked about.
Sheila's fundraiser isn't going as well as they'd hoped. About a month in, it's only raised $610. Early morning on the day of Sheila's surgery, her parents are still trying to get the word out.
Okay, so we're gonna make her sign hashtag Eyes for Sheila. Very good.
Think about what you're looking at there.
I'm seeing a two-parent household where the daughter is on her way to surgery despite the fact they can't actually pay the bill with the money they have right now. Despite the fact that they weren't able to raise that $10,000 towards this medical expense. So this wonderful anecdote isn't actually helping your case. And folks, let's break down what $10,000 is. I know it sounds like an awful lot, but when I lived in Connecticut, yes, Connecticut, one of the most expensive parts of the world to live in, southwestern Connecticut, with an unbelievably high tax rate. I made between $52,000 and $55,000 a year, and when I did, I was a single household, as in it was me and basically no one else, and I had to eat the cost of all of the bills basically by myself. And the result was that I was still a prioristically able to save, to completely set aside a minimum of $10,000 a year in my long-term savings account. And when I say an a prioristic minimum, that means every year that I made that dollar amount, I was able to set aside more than that dollar amount. And I know what you're going to say, Mike, the average individual income is only $31,000 in the U.S., roughly. Well, we're talking about a household with two incomes. So you have to compare household to household. And in this case, they're an average household, supposedly. And if we're talking about an average household, we're talking about an average household that makes just over $60,000 a year, or $8,000 more a year than I made in one of the most expensive parts of the world to make any money. So yes, you should be able to set aside in an average household $10,000 in 1 year. And let's walk back what $10,000 is, by the way, too, if you don't have that money saved up. And we will come back to that conversation of how you are supposed to save that money up and your responsibility in terms of saving that money up in the first place. If you can save up $250 a month and put it in an interest-bearing account, like my mutual funds, my very average investment that earns a very average mutual fund level of interest, 36 months. Folks, $250 a month at 36 months, and you've got $10,000 in your accounts. And let's talk about what $250 a month is. And there's a reason I picked $250 a month that we'll get into later in the video. But $250 a month when I was in Connecticut is like $400 a month gross. So in one of the most heavily taxed states in the union, $250 net is $400 a month gross, which actually kind of works out nicely for this thought experiment because of the math that it creates, which is if there are 4 weeks in a month, and there are more than 4 weeks in a month, then we're talking about, at $10 an hour, 10 extra hours a week. And there's a reason, folks, that I picked $10 an hour, because although the national minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, there are 17 states in the country where the minimum wage is more than $10 an hour. And we're not talking about Wyoming. We're not talking about North Dakota. No, we're talking about states like California and New York, states that have a tremendous number of people in them, and which, of course, have a tremendous number overall of jobs in them. And in the case that we're talking about, since we're comparing numbers in Connecticut, yeah, the minimum wage in Connecticut's quite a bit more than $10 an hour. So what that means is that if you can find any job, work it 10 hours a week, and you've got your $10,000 in 36 months or less. And I know what you're going to say, Mike, it's not always easy finding a job that pays the bills, but we're not talking about a great job. We're talking about a job that pays minimum wage at 10 hours a week. So we're talking about any job, which could be your current job at 10 hours a week, because you could just go to your boss and ask for more hours. And I know what you're going to say, Walmart isn't going to grant you more hours. Walmart won't let its employees work a certain number of hours, which I totally get. But 88% of the employment across the country is employment with small businesses. So not Walmart. So if we're talking about the average case, if we're doing this in good faith and having a conversation about, the average medical expense and the average experience, then we're not talking about Walmart. We're talking about somebody who's already working at a job that's, in the overwhelming majority of cases, something that's small business, something where I've worked, something where I've been the person that's been able to approve these type of hours, and they're very accommodating from my experience to these considerations. And I get it. When you have a kid, it's really hard to take on extra work, but you have a kid, and I'm sorry, but you are derelict in your responsibilities as a parent if you don't go to these type of lengths to ensure that these expenses are covered. And okay, I don't have a kid myself, so I'm not speaking from experience, but if I had a kid, the approach you would take is that kid is no longer just a kid. It's an extension of you until they can take care of themselves. And I would starve before my child has to suffer in this manner because I didn't work an extra 10 hours a week at some minimum wage job that I could get anywhere to pay off this sort of debt. And that doesn't even factor in the fact that as an adult, you should be setting aside a rainy day fund for exactly this type of rainy day expense. And if it's a health savings account, not only does it bear interest as a health savings account, you get all kinds of tax benefits for having that particular type of savings account. And if you're an average couple, if you're an average household making an average household income like I was in Connecticut, the extraordinarily expensive state of Connecticut, you should be able to set aside that $10,000 in 1 year. And like I just said, at $250 a month, you have that $10,000 saved up in 36 months, so long as you're willing to invest it in a very average mutual fund like the ones that I have. So I'm sorry, but if you're going to be totally irresponsible to the point of negligency with your money before you have a kid, then maybe don't have a kid. And if you don't have this money saved up, again, maybe don't have a kid, because this is what comes with having a kid. Kids are enormously expensive, and you really want to have that rainy day fund saved up so that when you do have the kid and you do run into these rainy days, you can take care of the kid, because this is what responsible adults do, regardless of whether or not you have a kid. And then once you have a kid, yes, it is your duty to come up with that money. I know you're going to say, Mike, what happens when you get knocked up? What happens when you unexpectedly get pregnant? Well, I'm sorry, but there is a very, very narrow path that you have to go down to get pregnant. Couples that are trying to get pregnant typically take 3 full cycles to actually succeed in getting pregnant. It typically takes about 90 days for a couple that is actively trying to get pregnant, for the couple that is going down that straight and narrow path to actually get pregnant. So, it's 2020. Condoms are $1. Pulling out is free. Rolling with the tides is free. There is typically a 3 to 7 day window where a woman can actually get pregnant. It is so easy to avoid getting pregnant. There are an infinite number of paths you can go down that do not lead you to pregnancy. There is one hyper specific thing that you have to do at a very specific time, and it still doesn't always work. So it's 2020. You'll lose my sympathy. Like, okay, maybe if it was 1520 and we don't know exactly how kids get born, then fine. But we kind of know how all of this works. And we really need to take a minute to walk back to that $10,000 to begin with and take a look at what $10,000 is from the perspective of the hospital, because this is going to make the point completely moot. Because for the hospital, $10,000 is nothing. And if you go to the billing department at these hospitals and say, I don't have the money, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to send you to the grants department. How do I know this? Because this has happened to me, and more than once, where I had an emergency room visit, got dumped on with a bill, didn't have insurance, didn't have the money to pay for it. And this is what they did across multiple hospitals, across multiple states. This was my experience. And I'm telling you, this is the common experience, because if you go to just about any hospital across the country, they're going to have an internal grants making department for exactly this purpose. And I'll give you the example of, let's do the example of when I had an ambulance bill that I couldn't afford. I called up the billing department and I said, listen, I don't have this money. And they said, call up the grants department. And in fact, don't even call up the grants department. We'll patch you through right now. The grants department said, give us a 1-page write-up on why you can't afford this expense and why you think we should write off a portion of this expense. And we'll take care of it and see what happens. And all right. And 2 weeks later, the bill was completely written off. And from my experience, having patient side of the table experience with this exact situation, and from my experience working with folks in the industry who are on the other side of the table, $10,000 is nothing. They're going to write this off. They're going to write this off. So especially in the case of this couple, especially in the case of this much of a sob story, the hospital's going to write this off. So again, if you don't have the patience or time or energy to devote 10 minutes into Microsoft Word to type up a 1-page story as to why you can't afford these bills and why you should get at least a portion of this expense written off, put it in an envelope, put 50 cents worth of stamps on there and send it in the mail. Again, you lose my sympathy if you're not going to take that 10 minutes worth of effort and 50 cents worth of stamps to get the entire bill written off, which is likely what's going to happen in the case of this couple. Again, you lose a whole lot of sympathy from me. And again, these are market-based solutions that John is going to completely ignore and totally negate everything he's going to prescribe in this video.
It's a pretty dystopian society that we're living in if your physical and financial well-being depend on whether your crowdfunding campaign can get a signal boost from Jif Pom the Pomeranian.
You mean if you're really good at responding to market influences? You mean it's a dystopian society where we actually reward people based on their competence? What does a society look like that doesn't do that? Would you prefer that society?
And good luck with that, by the way. I've been trying to get him to post our gerrymandering piece for months now, and he won't do it. Come on, Jif Pom, throw us a fucking bone, you asshole! The point is, any solution that might put an end to that is worth at least considering.
Yeah, how about a market-based solution? How about a solution based in free enterprise or actual consent? Spoiler alert, he's not going to consider it.
Surely, and to be honest, I personally think there is a lot to be said for Medicare for all. So tonight, let's take a look at it. Not the politics of whether it can pass, but what it actually is. And whenever the subject comes up, you tend to hear 3 major criticisms of it concerning cost, wait times, and choice. And
he's ignoring the most important consideration, which is how these sort of systemic changes, how does an upheaval of an entire sector of our economy at a foundational level, a sector of economy which accounts for 20% of all economic activity in this country, how does a total upheaval of that system affect consumer behavior? And, I'll give you the perfect example of this. Imagine a system where you don't have to respond to market influences, which is the system he's prescribing. Medicare for all is government controlling the means of production, and government, folks, does not have to respond to market influences. Imagine a monopoly. Imagine a government-protected monopoly, not a natural monopoly, a government-protected monopoly, one where Congress goes to Jeff Bezos and says, Jeff, we just came out with this wonderful new legislation that says folks can't buy anything unless they buy it from Amazon. Do you think Jeff's going to have any reason to keep his prices down? Do you think Jeff's going to have any incentive whatsoever to ensure that the products that are on Amazon.com are of good quality? Does he have any incentive whatsoever to reduce his Prime delivery from 2 days delivery free of charge to overnight free of charge? Do you think he's going to have any incentive to have quality customer care? Or is Jeff going to say, nope, fuck it. Got my money. I'm kicking my feet up, jacking up my prices. And you know what? Customer service can kiss my ass. More importantly, what incentive does Jeff have to keep his costs down? What incentive does Jeff have to produce a quality finished product? And that's just the producer side of the equation. We haven't even got to how this is going to affect consumer behavior. Because when you have consumers that don't have a realized cost at the point of sale, their behavior changes radically. For example, if you don't have any medical expenses whatsoever at the time of the actual expense, at the what's called point of sale, then what consumers tend to do is not shop around. They don't seek out the best source for care. They just go straight to the emergency room. They don't go to their primary care physician. What incentive do they have to call up their primary care physician and actually make an appointment? They're not going to self-ration when they seek care. They're not going to be incentivized to do the things that they need to do to keep themselves in good health, like diet and exercise. They're not going to be incentivized to do the things that they need to do to keep themselves informed on certain medical and health issues that would allow them to make decisions like whether or not to go to the emergency room rather than the primary care physician or the specialist. So we really need to ask ourselves, what effects these changes in consumer behavior will have on things like cost, quality, and wait times. We'll expand on this later, but spoiler alert number 2, consumer behavior, an entire college course you probably would have been required to take if you were taking anything related to business, finance, or economics, doesn't even get touched.
And let's start with cost, because critics will tell you that Medicare for All will simply increase the federal budget too much.
This sicko socialism would cost roughly $32.6 trillion over 10 years. Even if you doubled tax collections from individuals and corporations, yes, that means you'd be paying twice what you already do in taxes. That still doesn't cover the tab. My God, free healthcare is expensive.
Okay, so as a quick aside here, she's actually probably underestimating these costs, because let me tell you what it actually costs to have an insurance policy, a deferral of risk, where there's absolutely zero realized expense by the consumer at the point of sale. One of these ridiculous Cadillac plans, if you can even get them on the free market today, where you have zero deductible, zero max out of pocket, where you have a giant umbrella that covers basically every healthcare facility across the globe, where you have no copays. I was on one of these plans, and it cost me $15,000 a year. So I wasn't actually directly paying that cost, but this is a plan for somebody who was a dream candidate, and it was $15,000 a year. So I don't know what you are at home are paying in terms of insurance, but subtract that from $15,000 a year, and that's what we're talking about at a minimum to actually cover the cost of deferring the totality of risk through a Medicare for All plan. And on top of all of that, we have to have a serious conversation about receipts versus tax rates, because in order to pay that $15,000 a year times 330 million people, or that $32.6 trillion a year, she said that you're going to have to double tax rates. And that was based on a report that didn't take into consideration, like I said, consumer behavior. It didn't take into account the well-proved Laffer curve, which is the idea that when you jack up rates to that extraordinary level, people will try to avoid paying those rates and will try to avoid paying the expense. So those folks and businesses that can afford to set up tax havens in Ireland, for example, are going to do that. And what winds up happening is your receipts go down. So you've raised the tax rate, but your tax receipts have actually declined. Thomas Sowell actually talks about this in an essay he wrote that I actually just read on my other channel. I'll link to that in this video's description as well. But the idea is that, and it's been proven well over time, that if you lower tax rates, not only do you increase receipts, especially from the wealthiest businesses and the wealthiest individuals and the people who make the most money, the relative amount that they're paying in terms of tax receipts actually increases. So we have actually the wealthier people in this country paying a greater percentage of the actual receipts that are finally collected. So, you know, $32.6 trillion a year might $32.6, my God, $1 trillion over 10 years might actually be underestimating that expense. And then on top of that, you're probably not talking about doubling your tax bill. We're probably talking about quite a bit more.
Look, I know that sounds dramatic, but Sarah Palin's fourth attempt at cloning herself actually has a point there. Medicare for All would undeniably be expensive, but that fact needs a lot of context around it. For starters, it would increase the federal budget, yes, but it would also eliminate employer spending on premiums and your spending on out-of-pocket costs. Now,
so are you trying to imply that this would be a wash? Which, first thing first, That's a really, really, really dubious claim you're about to make, that when the government takes over an entire sector of what is an otherwise mostly privatized market, that the government's going to do it cheaper, better, quicker? Come on, John. That's a really dubious claim. Okay, so aside from the fact that we're introducing a whole new layer of bureaucracy that I'm so convinced is going to reduce costs over time and make this calculus a wash, by adding this layer of bureaucracy, you're increasing what's called distance between the originator of a good or service and the end user or consumer of the good or service, which we will get into at the end of this video. But I have a serious question as to whether or not you're willing to then consider what effects these policy changes are going to have in consumer behavior, and what effects those changes in behavior are going to have on things like costs and considerations like outcomes. And even if you did make all these considerations, and it really is a wash, single payer still means single payer, as in one, mono. So no competition in the market with a governmental protection. Mana. Do we have a word for this?
Would those balance each other out? That is a good question. The answer is no one can possibly know for sure. There are just too many variables involved. The Times asked 5 prominent experts to estimate national healthcare spending under Bernie's plan, and they compared that to what we spend now. And the results range from it would actually cost us less, to it would cost about the same, to it would cost a fuck of a lot more. And I know that extra shading does not look like very much, but believe me, it's a fuck of a lot.
Okay, so I can't tell if he's actually being sarcastic right here, but that really is a fuck of a lot. And he's right. I know it looks like tiny shading on that graph, but that shading is trillions and trillions of dollars. So this is actually true. I can't tell if this is sarcasm, and that's why I have to make this aside. This is actually true. Even though according to those studies, that is a fuck of a lot more.
But look, let's say, just for argument's sake, our overall spending did go up. We would be getting a lot for that money. Remember, 27 million more people would be covered, and they'd be covered well. Bernie's plan is incredibly generous. It covers vision, dental, long-term care, and drugs. In fact, Medicare for All is a misleading title because Medicare requires some co-pays and out-of-pocket expenses, and Bernie will excitedly tell you his plan eliminates those.
Okay, so these are called Cadillac plans by today's standards. So these actually exist. They're super hard to find. Generally speaking, you can't find them in the market. The reason I know they exist is because I had one through the town of New Milford, and it was a self-insured policy, which means you actually can't get it on the open market. And the town dumped it years ago because even the town, even the government was willing to acknowledge that this was just insanely expensive to have this Cadillac policy. Okay, so we talked about this before, but like I said, no copays, no deductibles, no max out of pocket, huge umbrella. So, okay, it didn't cover ocular, and the umbrella didn't cover absolutely everyone, but the point is, if that's going to be a consideration you're making, then you can actually jack up that price from that $15,000 that I cited before. And the second thing to consider is that that's going to be basically an after-tax expense. So again, raise that number up even more. And reminder, this was for me when I was in my middle 20s, when I was an absolute dream candidate. No kids, healthy, exercised, didn't smoke, basically non-drinking, and male, so I can't get pregnant. So yeah, I was like the dream candidate to insure. So you definitely can expect that $15,000 to be more, but let's just assume that it was at $15,000. So there's going to be a conversation here as to why I even bothered to insure myself, and we'll get into that later in this video. But if we multiply that $15,000, which again, you can expect to be more, by 330 million dream candidates, which they aren't, then you get about just shy of $5 trillion a year that you have to somehow get out of roughly 160 million workers. This is not just a small increase in taxes. And it's not possible to just get out of the 1% or the billionaires.
Under the Medicare for All bill that I wrote, premiums are gone. Co-payments are gone. Deductibles are gone. All out-of-pocket expenses are gone.
Scarcity is gone too. Bernie, you can't legislate away scarcity. You can't legislate away behavior-dependent conditions. this is a huge part of why you have to take into consideration how giant systemic changes like this are going to affect people's behavior. I mean, scarcity is like why this word doesn't even get mentioned, and it's not going to get mentioned in what is basically an economics lesson. Scarcity is something that you learn in day one, lesson one of introduction to economics, some sort of high school level economics course. This is the fundamental basis upon which all of modern economics depends. Scarcity is intrinsic to the human condition. There is not an infinite supply of labor, skill, resources, and time. Difficult decisions and evaluations are going to have to be made regardless of the system. And this is a point the left completely misses in a term the left plainly doesn't understand. This is a clear indicator of lack of competence when it comes to the left when discussing economic and financial issues, and John won't even mention the term once. What's it tell you, folks?
He's right. Hospital bills are gone. Co-payments are gone. Cell phone payments, gone. Flat tires, gone.
Okay, so I know it's a joke, but this is the perfect example of what I was talking about. How do you legislate away flat tires? What do you think would happen if you made flat tires illegal, or if you declared having running tires a right? Do you think that would make it impossible to get a flat tire? Do you think it would make flat tires completely go away? And this harkens back to that fundamental question John doesn't even want to ask. And I think if you ask John that question, I honestly think that he wouldn't even realize the significance of the question, let alone have an answer for it.
Geico commercials, gone. All the things you hate in this world will be gone, and all that will remain is universally accessible healthcare and Laura Dern.
Okay, so I want to point out that we had that conversation in the beginning about the difference between care and coverage, because he just said right there, universal health care, which is very different from coverage. So we've actually pivoted our conversation in a way that's going to obscure the difference between care and coverage. And I think the question needs to be asked, is there actually going to be universal care? Which honestly, I think this is probably just a mistake. But even John knows that you can't guarantee care because of a thing called scarcity that, again, John doesn't even want to ask. And this is why wait times are a very serious question. Because if you have to wait so long to get your care that you wind up dying waiting, then the care is obviously no longer universal. And I kind of don't care about the quality of care when you're not getting it because you have to wait so long to get it, which again is avoidable in a free market if you have enough money to overcome that. And in the government-controlled market, there's no way to overcome that. So that's why this question of wait times, that's why this serious question of how this policy is going to affect consumer behavior really needs to be addressed, and John's not even going to ask it.
Finally, life as it should be. Bernie's plan isn't just more generous than most current private insurance plans. It's more generous than the policy of any single-payer country on Earth.
Yeah, because even those countries know Bernie's plan's insane.
And there is a good case to be made that even if national spending wound up higher, we might wind up wasting less.
Wasting less? You think the government's going to waste less? You're going to add another layer of bureaucracy, and we're going to waste less? Hello, the U.S. government, which is famous for the U.S. military, the DMV, their $80,000 toilets. Okay, folks, I know that's a hyperbole. I can't believe I have to explain what hyperbole is. And I mean, yours was the side that was rightly complaining about how much time Trump was spending playing golf at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, less waste out of the government? Come on, John.
Right now, a lot of our healthcare spending doesn't go to healthcare. It goes to administrative costs that come with having a vast insurance industry.
And you think those costs are going to go down, or that it's going to be run more efficiently with the vast bureaucracy of the U.S. federal government? Come on, John.
That is clearly wildly inefficient. And consolidating all health insurance under one roof would give the government far more leverage to negotiate prices down. Because look.
Oh my God. John doesn't understand leverage. Okay, so we have to have a conversation about leverage, what it is, where it actually succeeds. and how to properly apply it. All right, so let's say that you're suing somebody and, you're either stuck doing it by yourself or, hey, the ACLU comes swooping in and takes over your case and litigates on your behalf. So you have their leverage, and the leverage that you have is the success itself, not the factors that contribute to the success. So the factors that contribute to their success are a specialized expertise in the field, are a giant team of attorneys they can call on at any moment, are all the licenses they have in all 50 states so that they can practice in all 50 states, are the fact that they have experience litigating these cases, and the leverage that they're able to employ at the negotiation table is the success they've had already. It's the success itself, not the factors that lead to the success. And because they're litigating on behalf of you, the individual client, they're able to tailor a system to meet your individual needs and demands. As the pool of clients starts to grow, that becomes a whole lot more difficult, and their responsiveness to your individualized needs and demands actually decreases as the pool starts to grow. This is why when you have class action cases, when you subscribe as a litigator, as a client to a class action case, your check in the mail, if they win or if they settle, winds up being like $1.30, and you wind up getting basically nothing out of it. The same thing is true in public schooling, and I've already done a video on that, and the link to that video is in this video's description, so check that out. But the short version is that the individual needs of students vary wildly from student to student and far exceed the four walls of the classroom. So this is why we do this sort of thing at a municipal level, because if you do a totally top-down approach to public schooling, then you're never going to be able to meet the individual needs of the students. You need to have a vast multitude of systems to actually meet all of their needs. This is why top-down approaches to public schooling don't work nearly as well as bottom-up approaches. Again, I go into this in far greater detail in that video, so check that out. And the same concept can be applied to patients. When you have to divide that leverage up between 330 million people, because that's what you have to do. Litigators aren't subatomic particles that can occupy two different spaces simultaneously. You wind up dividing that leverage to a point where it becomes moot. And it becomes even more moot when you don't have to respond to market influences, which we'll get into in a minute.
Look, it is no secret. Prices for procedures and drugs are out of control in the United States.
Why? This seems like an important question you're going to completely ignore.
It is so bad. One insurance provider in Utah recently started offering some of its participants cash if they were willing to travel a little further than their local pharmacy to fill out their prescription.
It's called pharmaceutical tourism. Here's how it works. PEHP puts patients on a plane and flies them to San Diego. From there, a private car takes them across the border to Tijuana, Mexico, where their prescription is waiting for them. The only difference, the prescription costs roughly half the price. PEHP will give people willing to travel an additional $500 back.
It's cheaper for us to pay for the drug down there, send them down there, and then give them $500.
That's fucking crazy!
Yeah, it's amazing. It's crazy what markets can do when it comes to the price of a good or service over time. This is not actually helping your case, John, because if you're going to advocate for Mexico, this isn't actually helping your case, John, because if you're advocating for the system Mexico has, you're advocating for a system that has almost zero regulation. Mexico doesn't have an FDA. There's virtually no enforcement of drug policies in Mexico. This is very well known and very well documented, and it's fucking Mexico. Crowder actually talked about price controls and how that's basically us paying the bill for their price controls. And then if we introduce the price controls in our market, then what you'll see is these new innovations just completely and utterly disappear because they can't make their money in other countries, but they can make their money here when they introduce a new drug to market. But in the case of Mexico, I don't honestly think there are actually price controls. I think you just have a wildly unregulated market that in Mexico results in incredibly low prices of virtually everything that's in their market. And let's compare that to the US, which despite leading the world in medical innovations, is oftentimes the last to see new innovations actually come to market because of the unbelievable regulatory hurdles these companies have to overcome. It costs $2.7 billion to get a new drug to market, and that doesn't even factor in failed attempts, and even those attempts that were successful at getting to market, it doesn't even factor in the cost of having those successes fail economically or financially once they actually do come to market. So drug companies have to bank on one home run and make all of their money off of that. So if we take the Mexico model, like you're implicitly suggesting, and get rid of these regulations, you end up seeing cheaper drugs with more new patents and faster market introduction. Everybody wins. Good on you for proving the effectiveness of capitalism, and join us.
Giving you $500 to go to Mexico to buy drugs is not what your insurance provider should be doing. It's what your sketchy friend Meredith should be doing. Because she wants to make Brianna's bachelorette party a total rager. I go myself, but I have outstanding warrants. Under Medicare for All, the government would be a much stronger negotiator. Now, you wouldn't want it to set prices so low that it stifles innovation or bankrupts doctors, but that...
Yeah, the free market does that perfectly. What better way is there to know what prices people are willing to pay than letting people pay the prices they're willing to pay? This is why it's impossible to perfectly set prices from one centralized body. We know what prices people are willing to pay in a market system because of this wonderful thing called consent, and because market systems have to respond to market influences. And this axiomatic truth is the definitional difference between government and the free market.
That is a balance that you would need to strike. Overall, you can't definitely say that it would be more expensive, but even if it was, I personally would argue that it's worth it. And either way, cost is a lot more complicated an issue than just going on TV and saying $32.6 trillion.
Right, because you have to account for how it's going to affect people's behaviors. Come on, John.
Like Tina Fey doing her best Dr. Evil impression. Anyway, the next major criticism of Medicare for All concerns wait times, specifically that it would result in rationing and delays to care.
Right, because you don't have to respond to market influences, so you get what are called shortages, an axiomatic truth endemic to the definition of central planning versus free enterprise. Do you feel like actually talking about this term, or are we going to blow right by this one too? Do I really even need to spoil this one?
If you think it's fun to wait in line at DMV, you're going to love Bernie Sanders' wait times for Medicare for All. It leads to the kind of care that people now have in England or Canada, where you have to wait in line.
Just take a look at Canada or the UK. It means long waiting lines. It means people not getting the health treatments they need.
Okay, I get that no one likes waiting in line for anything. I get it. Most people see the line at Trader Joe's and either abandon their cart or pull the fire alarm and sneak out with their groceries undetected. I'm not saying I've ever done that. I'm just saying I had a show to do tonight, and who wants some peanut butter pretzels? But
okay, that was funny.
Look, as with cost, comparisons of wait times are very complicated. For one thing, the international wait times that you hear about most often are for non-emergency surgeries.
Yeah, because they're the overwhelming majority of surgeries. So again, we're not talking gunshot wound victims. We're not talking stabbing victims. We're not talking about dudes who went flying through a windshield. No, we're talking about like broken bones.
As knee replacements. And while yes,
or knee replacements,
people in other countries do sometimes have to wait slightly longer for some care, it's not like Americans aren't having to do that right now anyway.
Yeah, but you're also comparing like waiting hours and days and very rarely weeks to weeks at the very least, definitely months, and very often years. This is why the 5-year cancer survival rates in the US are the highest in the world. This is why when you do a multivariate analysis that factors out things like the direct costs that you wind up having to pay, which doesn't factor in things, and these studies oftentimes don't factor in things like the enormously high tax rates in countries like the UK, Sweden, Netherlands, Denmark. Yeah, it's when you do these multivariate analysis and just look at outcomes, this is why the US is in the top 3 in virtually every outcome category. And again, the cost becomes a moot point when you have to wait so long you end up never getting the care. And that's not just true of people who are going to die in the period of time that they're waiting, but even true of people who have broken bones. You think if you break your collarbone and you have to wait 18 months, the surgery in 18 months is going to be the surgery you would have gotten 3 days later? No, they're going to come in 18 months later and say, holy crap, this bone's set totally improperly, so we're going to have to completely start this whole procedure over, and it'll be another 18 months before we see you again. This is why people flock to the US to get surgeries, as mentioned before. So we need to have that conversation about the triangle of business. So the triangle of business is quantity, quality, and price. You can get two of the 3 points of the triangle, but you can never get all three. And for the sake of this conversation, quantity is the same thing as speed. So before we actually talk about the business triangle, let's talk about the college triangle, because the concept is the same. In college, as we all know, you can get sleep, you can get good grades, and you can get drunk. You can get two of those 3 points, but you can never get all three. If you want to sleep in and get good grades, it means you're not going to have time to party. If you want to get good grades and get drunk on the weekends, then you're never going to sleep. If you want to sleep in and party hardy all the time, then your grades are going to tank. The same thing is true in the business world. So if you're looking to hire a plumber, if you want the absolute best plumber now, then you're going to pay for it. So you're going to get the best quality and you're going to get the best speed, but you're going to get a terrible price. If you want a guy now that's going to be dirt cheap, he's probably going to be the guy who has a terrible reputation and is willing to just take any work because he doesn't have any work lined up. If you don't care about getting the best plumber now, and you really don't want to get, the triple time charge to get a rush job done, then you can probably get that other plumber who's the really great plumber for a halfway decent price, but you're going to have to wait in line because he's the best plumber in town and he's got a line out the door of customers that want him working for you. So if you take one of these top-down approaches that demands low prices through things like price controls and still demands high quality, you're going to have to sacrifice on speed, which means long wait times. Innovation is the only way to get around all this, and the market system is the only one that incentivizes innovation. And this all comes back to scarcity, because there's only so many awesome plumbers. But in a market system, you get to determine what your priorities are, and you get to make those determinations. And this harkens back to the moralistic argument that we're going to be making later on in this video, trust me.
Americans are just sometimes forced to wait due to the expense.
And in the UK, you're forced to wait at gunpoint. Which one's better? The one where you can actually overcome the wait time, or the one where you literally can't? Yeah, I'd say all the people flocking to this country for exactly this reason kind of answer that question.
About half of US adults say they or a family member put off or skipped care in the past year because of the cost.
So were they responsible consumers then? What happens when you don't have to consider costs? Would you listen to your doctor's instructions? Would he say, you're really going to put your family through an awful lot, if nothing else from the financial burden, if you don't put down the bottle, stop smoking quite so much, maybe, eat some vegetables and get a little exercise, right? In a market system, at the very least, when I kick the bucket at 45, man, that hospital bill is going to be really expensive, and my family hasn't had a lot of time to save up for that, and man, those funeral costs are going to be really expensive. In a system where you don't have to make those cost considerations, is that really what's going to happen? Nah, fuck that. I'm eating my cheeseburgers, french fries, and Bud Light. Fix my heart, bigot. Would they even get a primary care physician, or would they just go straight to the ER for everything? Well, we already know what the answer is, because the extremely dirt poor in this country are already covered by certain governmental programs, and what they do is they go straight to the emergency room for everything. And I'm not knocking the ER. The ER has its place. It's great for the guy that got hit by the bus and terrible for the guy with the sniffles, because if you have the common cold, you're going to have to wait in line for that guy that's been hit by the bus. And what you should really be doing is going to your doctor. And a really responsible adult is going to get themselves informed on their sniffle and realize, hey man, it's the common cold. Eat some chicken noodle soup, drink some ginger ale, and you'll be over it in a week or two, because it's the common cold. And I know what you're going to say. Well, what if it's a little bit worse than that? What if it's the flu? Now that we have this coronavirus scare coming around, it's the flu. Like, yeah, you can go see your doctor about that, but you're completely wasting your time going to honestly see your doctor ex post facto, when the reality is, and everybody knows it, when you have the flu, you eat some chicken noodle soup, you drink some ginger ale, maybe you take a day off from work, and you're over it in 2 to 3 days, because folks, it's the flu. I don't know what you're going to say. You should be getting the flu shot when it comes to the flu, so you don't get the flu in the first place. And my response, of course, is that when you have a market system, what you have are prices. And prices actually allow us to better distribute the scarce resource, which is the flu shot. We don't have an infinite supply of them. So the people that are most willing to pay the highest price, which are the people who are most in need of the flu shot, are basically going to get bumped to the front of the line because they're willing to pay that higher price. And if there's some leftovers, what you'll have is actually what's called a surplus. So the people who really weren't willing to pay that higher price, but are willing to pay the lower price, well, if you have a surplus, then how do you get those things sold? You lower your price. So we actually have a system already in place then for ensuring that the people who need the flu shot the most actually get the flu shot. And then we actually have a system that encourages the makers of the flu shot and the distributors of the flu shot to build access so that we can have enough flu shots for everyone to get one. And by overproducing by a little tiny bit, technically, you wind up having enough flu shots for those folks who probably don't honestly need it, so you can establish herd immunity. And this all goes back to that conversation we were having about the responsible adult. So a responsible adult goes to the grocery store, gets a toothbrush, gets some toothpaste, and brushes their teeth at least twice a day. And a responsible adult doesn't just call up the dentist and say, schedule me two appointments a day, schedule me 2 cleanings a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, which we don't do today because that would be unbelievably and unconscionably expensive. But if we don't experience that cost at the point of sale, what exactly is incentivizing the good behavior? What exactly is incentivizing is precluding someone from being so inclined to just say, screw it, I'm not brushing my teeth. I'm not wasting my time going to the grocery store. I'm not getting toothbrushes. I'm not getting toothpaste. I'm not wasting that time. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to the dentist office and every day demand that I get 2 cleanings a day from the dentist himself, the best type of cleaning you can possibly get. Yeah, this is what an incentive is, right? And I realize that, maybe it's not twice a day. Maybe it's bi-weekly or monthly, which you absolutely don't need to go to the dentist. You do not need to go to the dentist that often. You're actually just occupying space that could be used for more critical clients and more critical patients. And this is what causes shortages. Shortages which are endemic to one system and not in the other, because we have this wonderful thing called consent and prices. And if we had perfectly responsible adults, we wouldn't have the epidemic, which is obesity in this country, which you don't have in basically any other country the world over. And speaking of things you really don't have in, for example, your developed countries, you have in this country, and it goes back to the irresponsible adult and bad behavior, these isolated pockets of extremely high violent crime rates that you just don't have in places like Finland and Sweden. It's a huge part of why you don't have problems with car accident deaths in other countries. And of course, we're going to continue to drive. We're a huge country and land area, and we're very well off. So of course, we're going to continue to drive. And if you actually factor out the obesity, car accidents, and these isolated pockets of extremely high violent crime rates, which you just don't have in other countries, then our actual statistics and the data related to our healthcare system and our medical outcomes suddenly becomes the best in the world. So it sounds like it's not something that's happening at the point of care, but way before that. Again, we need to answer the question of how people's behavior is going to change under these systems. And, again, I'm beating a dead horse here, but he's not going to talk about it.
And about 1 in 8 say their medical condition got worse because of that delay.
How much worse? And according to whom? The patients themselves? Is this a self-reported statistic?
As for the uninsured, they can wind up having to wait on a literal line, seeking care with aid groups like Remote Area Medical, an organisation that travels the country setting up mobile clinics to treat people for free, and which draws massive lines wherever it goes.
Having got their place in line, many camped out for the night. Before dawn, this was the moment they were waiting for.
Okay, so like I said, hours, maybe days, not months, and definitely not years.
Number 1, come on down. Number 2, right here. Number 3.
One by one, patients are let in for their chance of a visit to a doctor, a dentist, and an optician. At first, RAM focused on communities in remote areas of developing countries. But Stan says he gradually came to realize the depth of need in the US.
Today, 80% or more of what we do is here in the United States.
Okay, so this is a free market solution to bringing care to people who otherwise would not get it at zero cost to the consumer, so long as they're willing to wait a few hours rather than months or years. This isn't actually helping your case, John. In fact, it proves the point that resources are scarce, so eventually someone is going to have to make this tough decision, which is something we'll have to come back to later on in this video.
It's unbelievable to me that that is the case. Normally, Americans hate it when a British person comes over to diagnose what's wrong with you. Believe me, 6 seasons of YouTube comments have made that very fucking clear.
Okay, that's funny too. See, I told you I can disagree with him and still find him funny.
The internet is mean! And for all critics' talk of wait times abroad, it is worth knowing less than 10% of Britons or Canadians say that their health system needs to be rebuilt completely, compared to 23% of people here in the United States.
And how many of them are wrong? You see, I don't care about opinion polling because their opinion on how good the system is doesn't reflect how good the system actually is. This is why this is why opinion polling is considered a useless metric when making objective evaluations. If, for example, if you polled people in the Soviet Union about what they thought of their country, yeah, they're probably going to tell you it's wonderful and they love it. If you polled people in North Korea versus South Korea, I bet you the result is that in North Korea, basically everyone says, man, their system is awesome. And you might get a tiny bit of dissenting opinion in South Korea because South Korea actually allows for dissenting opinion. But do you see why I'm saying that, like, opinion polling doesn't actually reflect the actual care provided?
Hosted the 2012 Olympics. The opening ceremony featured a 4.5-minute celebration of the National Health Service, featuring swing dancing doctors and nurses and children jumping up and down on hospital beds.
Whoa. So that doesn't really look so much like a celebration as like really eerie propaganda. Globals would be proud.
As for Canada, they adore their health service so much that when they had a contest for the greatest Canadian of all time, this was the result.
The greatest Canadian as decided by you is...
Tommy Douglas!
American here, so whoever the fuck that is.
The mother of all national titles goes to the father of Medicare.
Oh, that guy. Oh, okay, so Bills fans. Fucking delusional.
His master's thesis, The Problems of the Subnormal Family, endorsed eugenics, but we're going to ignore that because it was the 1930s and no one's perfect! Give it up for Tommy! Woo! And look, then there is the final big criticism of Medicare for All, which involves choice. Specifically, that it would take away our ability to choose the sort of health coverage that we receive.
Yeah. That's what single payer means. And again, you said coverage, not care provider. I mean, John, come on, it's built into its very name.
When I hear that healthcare is a right, what I hear is healthcare will no longer have choices.
Under Medicare for All, your choice of health coverage disappears.
Americans are still Americans. We're not socialists, we're not communists, we like choice. And we like to have choice in healthcare, especially.
Right. Americans are Americans, it's true. And they do like having choices. It's why the #1 rated series on Netflix is 40 minutes of looking through the menu for something good. It's basically America's new national pastime. And the fact you're applauding that is a full cosign on that concept. But the fact is our current system limits Americans' choices far more than it expands them. For starters, as a practical matter, most of us don't choose our health insurance. We get what we get through our employer. And because of...
Yeah, but we get to choose who our employer is, regardless of how difficult that decision itself is. Okay, so this is where we're going to have that conversation about distance. Distance is the proverbial, and I'm going to use the word in its definition, distance between the originator of a good or service and the end user or consumer of that good or service. So when you have a lot of steps along the way to get from one to the other, you have an increased distance. So if there two are standing right here and you have to go through Timbuktu to get to there, then you have a giant distance between the two. And when you tend to increase distance, you tend to increase the price of the good, and you tend to decrease the quality of the good. And most importantly, you tend to decrease the responsiveness of the producer of the good, the originator of the good, to the needs of the end user or consumer of the good. And since you're all a bunch of leftists, yeah, we're going to go with an example that you guys should all be able to relate to, and we'll create an analogy for it based on the world of weed, right? So if you have Hippie Dave, and Hippie Dave goes to Joe Schmo down the street to buy his weed, what is he going to get? Well, he's going to get whatever Joe has for whatever price Joe is willing to sell it. And of course, he could get a Hippie Dave could easily get a much lower price and a much higher quality good if he goes to Farmer Randy and skips all the 18 middlemen along the way who are rightly going to be looking to make profit along the way as they cut up all of this weed, and you end up getting Hippie Dave, who says to Joe Schmo down the street, "Hey man, I hate your weed. Can we do something about this?" What's Joe going to tell him? Yeah, no, whatever. I get whatever I can get from him. But the farmer has an incentive to say, you know what, I can blend my indica and my sativa in a different mixture that is more accommodating to Hippie Dave. And if Hippie Dave goes to the farm and he says, "Hey man, like, I want to buy straight from you. I want to skip all these guys, and I want to get the best weed that you have in your farm." And if he doesn't have any good weed, then, Farmer Randy has a really good reason to start growing some great weed, because Hippie Dave is going to be buying from him directly, and he actually has that influence. And whereas Hippie Dave has to go through 18 layers of, "Hey man, can you get better weed? Hey man, can you get better weed? Hey man, can you get better weed?" And at some point, somebody's going to be like, "Tough." And the farmer might say tough too, but he's only one person. So the iterations of those 18 people, yeah, you had a 50-50 shot at convincing the farmer to say yes. But if you're going through 18 people, it's an astronomically unlikely circumstance that you're actually going to get an improved quality of weed. And on top of that, like I said, if you're buying from the farmer directly, we all know that you're going to be getting a cheaper weed. Now, I know what the response is going to be. Farmer Randy is going to tell Hippie Dave to piss off if he's not buying it by the pound. Okay, so Hippie Dave can't go to the farm, but can Hippie Dave bring the farm to him? Can he just go out and pick up 3 seeds, some potting soil, 3 fistfuls of potting soil, 3 planters, and, a cheap grow light and a closet, and grow the weed in his closet with a little bit of water for like a $300 to $500 investment, and have a lifetime supply of weed? Yeah, absolutely. And then how well is he able to then control the quality of his good, and how cheap does he get it? Well, he gets it for basically nothing, plus the $300 to $500 in supplies that he's going to have to buy over the course of his lifetime for that weed. Here's the cool part about how that distance effect works. If he's got Steve the roommate, and Steve the roommate comes in and tries Hippie Dave's new weed. "Man, Dave, this weed is way better than the stuff I get from Joe. Can I just buy from you?" And maybe Hippie Dave's grown a little bit more than he needs, because let's be honest, 3 full-grown plants is way more than any one dude is ever going to smoke by themselves. So yeah, I'll sell it to you for the same price that Joe's selling it to you. But you only have to come across the hallway to get it, and you're getting way better weed. Everybody wins. And if Joe winds up getting cornered and, gets forced out of the market, well, Joe can still buy his weed from Hippie Dave. And, maybe the effect is that Dave has to lower his price throughout the market in order to compete with Joe, because people just want whatever cheap in certain circumstances. Well, that's going to force Joe to say, "Hey, maybe I'm just going to buy from Dave from now on and distribute to all those other people that, I couldn't distribute to otherwise." Everybody wins, because what you have when you have this choice, when you have this lower distance, is the introduction of competition. And aside from everybody winning, this competition, as you saw in this example, breeds innovation. And in terms of economics, this is why this conversation on choice is so important, because without it, what happens? Well, we talked about that earlier in the video, where Bezos has government protections to bend over the customer in terms of price and kiss customer service goodbye. Like, goodbye overnight shipping, goodbye 2-day shipping, hello $6,000 a month subscription fees. And I feel like we have a word for when a sector of the market is totally controlled by a protected single provider or producer, single mono. So the reason this concept matters is because of the case of the person who doesn't have insurance. And that person was me. And again, I've mentioned it a few times now. I've already done that in another video, and this video is getting awfully long. So a link to that video is in this video's description. Go ahead and check it out. But the short version is, again, if you don't have insurance, then you get to negotiate directly with the hospital over things like costs and the type of care you're actually going to get. Now, I realize in today's society, you don't have much room for that because these prices aren't displayed. And the reason for that is because everyone is subscribed to insurance. Yes, I am advocating for not bothering for insurance when you're healthy, when you're in your middle 20s, when you're male, when you hit the genetic jackpot like me. You are going to lose out on insurance in the long run, just like the overwhelming majority of people out there in the market in the first place. This is why actuaries have the job that they have. And this is why insurance companies exist, because if they didn't make money off of you in the long run, they would go out of business and they would cease to exist. So yes, in many cases, I am advocating for people not paying their monthly premiums and instead saving that money, putting it aside in probably a health savings account where you can bear interest and get all kinds of government incentives and get all kinds of tax incentives. And you'll wind up returning us to a system that we once had where you had very high quality of care, at least for the time. Yes, in the 1950s, they didn't have the medical technology and advancements that we have today. But I mean, this is how doctors used to operate, right? You paid out of your pocket without insurance for a trip to the doctor's office, and you could in most cases afford it. And when you genuinely couldn't, you knew the doctor on a first name basis. So the doctor said, you know what, pay it forward, we'll take care of it. And in many cases, the doctor would come to your doorstep, which, when was the last time you had a doctor come to your doorstep in 2020? When was the last time you had a doctor come to your doorstep ever? I mean, it's been genuinely decades since this was the practice and since this was the custom, and it's all because you don't get to negotiate directly with your doctors. You have this giant distance between the originator of the service or good and the end consumer of that service or good, which is the patients. And the more directly you get the patients to corresponding with their doctors when it comes to these sort of things, the more transparency in cost structures you're going to get. So when you go to the doctor's office and say, how much is an x-ray? They give you the old, I don't know. We can't find out until we provide the care for you, which is ridiculous because it's an x-ray and there's one guy that does basically all of them. There's one cost for the paper. You can probably build a structure pretty easily where you have just on the wall, behind the wall, type of x-ray cost. But again, because nobody has any incentive to have that negotiation isn't going to happen. And we all lose because of it. Yes, I am advocating for people to get off insurance in many cases. The point is, this all becomes your choice. And this is going to lead us to the moralistic argument on top of the economic argument that John doesn't want to have.
That choices like changing jobs can become significantly harder. And not just that. Oftentimes, your choice of doctors and hospitals is severely limited by...
Your choice of doctors or hospitals is limited. So I feel like I remember some quote about, if you like your doctor, if you like your insurance, you get to keep them, something along those lines.
Which ones your insurance will cover. Going out of your insurance network can be prohibitively expensive. That is why people bend over backwards to stay in network. And even when they do that, it can still all go horribly wrong.
While campaigning in 2018, Democratic Congresswoman Katie Porter's appendix burst. Her first thought, how much would it cost?
I didn't call an ambulance because I knew it could cost a lot if you call an ambulance. And I had specifically had my manager drive me not to the closest hospital, but to the in-network hospital.
Even though the hospital was in her network, the surgeon who helped save Porter's life was not, and she got a bill for nearly $3,000.
$3,000. We went through the financials for this. And I mean, she still got the care regardless of the bill. And it seems like in this circumstance that you're using to support your case, John, having the insurance in the first place didn't help her. It seems like she was paying X dollars a month for absolutely nothing, when in reality, if she had put aside $250 a month, she'd have $10,000 saved up over the course of 3 years for an emergency like this, for a rainy day like this. And the reason I used $250 a month before was because, as you'll see in the other video that I keep mentioning that I've linked to in this video's description, $250 a month was the premium I was supposed to pay for the insurance that I looked into getting when I was in my early 20s, which was dog shit insurance coverage before the ACA. So you can expect that, number one, these type of plans basically don't exist any longer. And number two, you can expect that the absolute bare minimum you're going to pay a month for health insurance is $250. So I rolled the dice and went without insurance and then got this giant bill dumped on me. And for 3 years, I paid nothing in premiums. And then for the next 8 years, I paid back that colossal debt that I got from the hospital. And you know what I was able to do because I didn't have health insurance? Negotiate a price and a payment plan I could actually afford, and which wound up being, even in the worst months, which were at the beginning of that 8-year period, which were in the first year or two of that 8-year period, were still less than $250 a month. So what good did it do me having this dog shit insurance? The answer is it did nothing for me. And in the case of this lady, it seems that insurance did absolutely nothing to help her case. And the most important thing to point out here is that the facility she decides to go to and the transportation method she decides to use is still going to be a decision you're going to have to make, even in a single payer system, because of scarcity. And folks, this is, if you get nothing else out of this video, the only appropriate place for these decisions to be made is in the home. The only person who should be making these type of decisions is the patient themselves, not some giant governmental bureaucracy. And this is where we get into the moralistic argument, because to suggest otherwise is plainly immoral. And folks, that's what you're going to get with central planning.
Exactly. You can get fucked by taking an ambulance, you can get fucked by going to the wrong hospital, or you can get fucked by going to the right hospital but getting the wrong surgeon.
Or you can get fucked by the surgeon not existing because you exist in a system that has built-in shortages and makes you wait forever to get that care. And again, because that system doesn't have to respond to market influences, I'd rather at least have a chance, even if that chance is wholly dependent upon how much money I have, which is something I have at least some control over, than to be fucked by shortages, something endemic to this system and thus axiomatically outside of my control.
The American healthcare system gives you so many choices as to how you want to get fucked. It truly is the Kama Sutra of healthcare. And under Medicare for All, that scenario would not happen. No doctor would be out of network
because those doctors wouldn't exist.
Because there wouldn't be a network at all. And the truth about Americans' current illusion of choice is that too often, because of cost, the choices our current system forces people to make are ones like this.
I prioritize the heart stuff over the insulin because the heart stuff is more immediate. I know over time, diabetes will kill me, but it'll take a longer time. And I know that without the heart failure drugs, I only have 13% function of my heart. I don't want to play with that.
Okay, we're going to have to end it here because the rest of the video is pretty redundant and we're getting really long. And this is where we go off the deep end of immorality. Diabetes is going to kill this woman. Nothing is going to prevent this. This is a non-existent technologies problem, not a problem of affordability. Like they said in Scrubs famously, everything we do here is a stall. Scarcity is going to exist, and the market system establishes prices which allow the consumer to set their own priorities. Prioritization is something that is going to happen regardless of the system because you can't legislate away scarcity, and it is morally reprehensible to take that prioritization and decision-making process away from the individual. It is plainly immoral to advocate for the removal of consent from these types of transactions, and that is exactly what these systems do by their design.